Whether you love cycling or you hate cyclists, there's a very important issue in this video raised by Paul, who emailed me to talk about this very issue that happened to him. So there's a few views on this, and I'd like your views in the comments below. And do you know what? I'm going to tag in Ashley Neal for your views as well. Hopefully you pick this up and leave your comments below. So what happened was this. Paul says he was proceeding at approximately 8 miles an hour in slow moving traffic. A good clear day on a regular 30-mile-an-hour road with single lanes either side. A dedicated cycle lane approximately 1 meter wide between him and the curb. Some 10 meters from the left junction he intended to turn into, he started to indicate left. Paul says he's a biker too, so automatically checks mirrors several times for traffic which may be passing or that he might interfere with by turning. All clear multiple times, both sides. As I began to turn left, Paul said, and still travelling at approximately 8 miles an hour, a lady on a bicycle undertook me at some pace. Around 25 miles per hour would be an accurate guess. I emergency stopped, but gratefully did not cause an accident and there were no collisions. So the question is, in several parts: 1, was I in the wrong, Paul says? 2, was the cyclist in the wrong? And 3, which part of this is covered by what law? So in those order, let's talk about those issues now. First of all, we've talked about the highway code in great detail in other videos. I'll try to link some of those videos if I remember, but you'll remember that there is a change in the hierarchy and priority, in that vehicles have to give priority to cyclists and cyclists have to give way to pedestrians. It's in the order of which is most likely to cause damage. So strictly speaking, the vehicles should be looking to give way to cyclists, even if you are turning left and they are, let's say, undertaking you. Remembering as well that cyclists are permitted to filter through traffic on the right or the left-hand side. However, it's not quite as simple as that. Whilst there is quite a heavy burden on the vehicle to make sure that you've checked your blind spots and that you've absolutely checked to make sure that there is nothing there on your left-hand side if you are planning to turn left up ahead, let's not also forget that cyclists should be riding with consideration for other road users. The cyclist is a road user after all. So if a cyclist is undertaking or filtering on the left-hand side of another vehicle, you should be doing so with some consideration for other road users. There isn't just a blanket rule that cyclists can ride however they like and irrespective of whether or not it's safe to do so. And this situation described by Paul is exactly that which, in my view, is going to cause the most problems. Cyclists that are passing a vehicle on the left too quickly, the vehicle is intending to turn left, and there's a potential collision waiting to happen. Now, Paul obviously was driving very cautiously because managed to stop without hitting the cyclist, or vice versa. So well done for that, first of all. So when Paul says, was I in the wrong? Well, no, in the sense that you were checking your mirrors several times to make sure there was nothing there. And ultimately, you were able to stop to avoid any collision. Now, not checking your blind spot is not really a defense, because after all, you shouldn't be turning left unless you are sure that there is nothing there. So if there were a collision, doubtless the cyclist would try to claim against you for failure to make sure that there was nobody there. However, this ties in with the next question, which is, was the cyclist in the wrong? Well, yes and no. No, in the sense that cyclists can pass on the right or on the left. However, as I said, they still should be doing so with some regard to other road users. If they are reckless and driving dangerously, then they may well be the cause of the collision themselves. The difficulty in this situation is that it sounds like the cyclist was in a cycle lane, so there should be even more care taken by drivers when looking out for cyclists coming down in what is a cycle lane, although it doesn't stop there. Rule 74 is worth looking at. This is within the rules for cyclists. When we look at Rule 74 for cyclists, we see that it provides that when approaching a junction on the left, watch out for vehicles turning in front of you, out of or into the side road. It also says do not ride on the inside of vehicles signalling or slowing down to turn left. So as I said, all road users are required to follow all of the rules of the highway code. Some of them are backed up with law, some of them are just rules, but these rules are going to form the basis of arguments if you end up in court as to whose fault it was. So in that situation, regardless of it being a cycle lane, a cyclist coming down, if let's say Paul was stopped to or slowing down to turn left and indicating to turn left, and this cyclist is coming down on the left hand side, Rule 74 provides that the cyclist should not have gone past Paul on the left-hand side if his vehicle is waiting to turn. So on the one hand, Paul's got the obligation to look out for any cyclists in the left-hand lane, and courts will often protect the more vulnerable road user. There is certainly an argument to make that the cyclist should not have passed Paul on the left-hand side if it's clear that he's going to turn left. As I say, the wording of Rule 74 is very clear. It says, do not ride on the inside of vehicles signalling or slowing down to turn left. So that, I would say, is the strongest defense here. If the cyclist is racing down in the cycle lane, they should maintain awareness of what's going on around. That includes any roads up ahead where vehicles might be turning into or out of those left-hand side roads, and therefore it comes down to this balance. And so ultimately, this is going to be one of those situations where you would hope to get some kind of witness evidence from other people as to what exactly happened. If the cyclist was racing down and raced down the side of this vehicle, albeit in a dedicated cycle lane, it's likely to come down to a balance between the level of care the driver was driving with and whether or not the cyclist was riding dangerously. It's also possible that the cyclist was swerving in and out of other vehicles, which is why Paul didn't see this cyclist. I've certainly seen videos where cyclists are weaving in and out of traffic like this, and it would be virtually impossible for any vehicle to see them. So if this scenario teaches us anything, is that if you are turning left, you should come to a virtual standstill, if not a complete standstill, if you are in any way unsure, such as a cycle lane next to you, so that you can be absolutely certain that there are no cyclists coming down on your left-hand side, because there is a significant risk that the court is going to find in favour of the cyclist and say exactly that the vehicle should have made absolutely certain that there is no cyclist coming past you on the left-hand side. Now, obviously, this might be negated if there is witness evidence to say that the cyclist was swerving in and out of traffic and that there is no reasonable way that the driver could have known the cyclist was there. But given the speed that Paul says they were riding at, it's certainly a possibility that they were in the cycle lane just some distance away that you couldn't really see, which comes back to the point that you should absolutely come to a virtual stop, if not a complete stop, when you're turning left, to ensure that there's nothing coming down on the left-hand side. This is all underpinned in the Highway Code. For example, Rule 170 says, take extra care at junctions. You should watch out for cyclists and motorcyclists and pedestrians, including powered wheelchairs and mobility scooters, as they are not always easy to see. Be aware that they may not have seen or heard you. Remembering, of course, that if there are stop lines, then you must stop behind those white lines. And again, in Rule 180, wait until there's a safe gap between you and any oncoming vehicle. Watch out for cyclists, motorcyclists, and so on. Check your mirrors and your blind spot again to make sure that you're not being overtaken. And this would also be the same for being undertaken, because as I say, cyclists often do pass you on the left-hand side. So as unfair as it might sound, it's very likely that a court is going to come down on the side of the more vulnerable road user and say that the driver should have stayed put until they were sure that there were no cyclists passing. That's not to say that the court is never going to find in favour of the driver, because if eyewitness testimony says that the cyclist was just driving erratically and dangerously and swerving in and out of vehicles at speed, the court might then simply blame the cyclist. But there's always a risk, and since it is a more vulnerable road user, the injuries are likely to be much more severe and the penalties then far greater if you are found at fault. So as the driver of a mechanically propelled vehicle of any description, you are always urged to be absolutely as sure as you can that there is nothing passing you when you're about to turn. I know that doesn't definitively answer the question. Very often these are "it depends," but I hope that's of some use. Please do keep the questions coming, like the video and subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.